Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm going to be asking the question, to double or not to double? So, it should be obvious that I'm playing a double-barreled tank. It's the one, the only, the ST2. This vehicle packs not one but two 120mm guns that it can fire either sequentially or it can fire both at the same time, giving it the highest alpha damage, 880 with a single salvo. The tricky thing about this vehicle sometimes, and I've been playing it a little bit more recently and starting to feel a little bit more confident in the tank, is to decide about whether having the double barrel gun is actually a bit more of a confusing aspect to the vehicle, or if it's actually an advantage. Now firstly, let me clarify. In my opinion, it is a massive advantage to have the double barrel on this tank. To put it into perspective, this vehicle has the same kind of statistics that you would have on the IS-4 before it was buffed. However, it's just got two guns. So how could having two guns not be useful, right? If you miss the first shot, you can hit the second shot, albeit 5 seconds later, or you can try and launch both barrels at the same time to have those whopping alpha damage hits. The problem with the vehicle these days, however, is while a lot of the other heavy tanks have been buffed, I'm looking at you, IS-4, the ST2 stays with those kind of pre-buff IS-4 statistics. Doesn't really have the protection, it definitely doesn't have the brawling capacity and close quarters combat that you would have on an IS-4 now, but the double barrel gun itself does still make up for that. The win ratio on this tank, at least in the last 30 days, according to the Tomato GG website on the European server, has not been incredible, but there have been worse Soviet tanks. In this kind of a scenario, it's about trying to figure out how can I make sure the T-55A doesn't kite me, and I decided, well, if I drive towards the front of their tank, that doesn't give them enough chance to be able to escape. If I'd come round this way, maybe they'd manage to get over there, it would have been a bit awkward. And this is the decision right now. Do we fire singles, do we fire doubles? With the 60 TP angled like that, and he looked like he was angling more, I didn't feel confident to be able to go for the double. This mill, on the other hand, this looks like a juicy shot, and oh dear. That's a bit filthy. That's the highest alpha damage heavy tank in the game, sitting, to all intents and purposes, a brand new mill player as their top of the tree at the moment, but on fire, with 948 damage dealt with the two shells that entered the vehicle. That's a high roll, by the way. I'm rolling plus 60, nearly plus 70 damage on that roll. But also then, the subsequent fire cooks the Emil for 443, leaving them with 9 hit points? Well, I guess that's more than nothing. Or is it even really that nice? I don't know about you, but in those kind of situations when I'm in a tier 8 tank and a tier 10, it's pretty much taken everything from me apart from my life. I almost wish they'd just get it over with, right, in that scenario. But definitely, the double there, absolutely awesome. So you see me looking round now and realizing that I'm in an absolute fabulous spot for the ST2. And that's because my weak point on this tank is actually up here, up towards the right. And I can use this rock position in front of me, the breeze blocks, to be able to protect it. However, unfortunately, I can't really protect myself from high explosive anti-tank rounds that are able to just go through the top of my vehicle in that scenario. Nevertheless, already in the first 4 minutes of this game, we're up to 4,000 damage dealt, albeit with a pretty lucky fire on the Emil, but that's only added the equivalent of 1 extra shot. What we're doing now is using the wonderful nature of being able to fire 1 barrel, wait, reload, fire another barrel, wait, reload, but then still have the opportunity to deliver 2, or to fire 2 in fairly quick succession as well. Your double barrel gun is a definitive advantage when you have a beautiful opportunity where you're going to be 80 or 90% chance to be able to go through the Emil, like I was. However, for all of you double barrel players out there, or players who after seeing this are thinking like, oh, I want to have that for myself in some World of Tanks. Firstly, before I go on, let me tell you, the IS-32, in my opinion, is better tier for tier than this. So make sure you don't sell that tier 9 tank, otherwise you might regret it. But also, what I have found, having played lots of double barrel tanks now, and starting to come into my swing in the ST2, is that more often than not, unless you're kind of like 80 or 90% certain, it's best to not fire the double. Quite often, if you do, And you end up in that kind of position where the enemy now knows that you are vulnerable until you manage to reload one shell, let alone being locked out of the reload as well, with kind of a penalty for having fired the double in the first place that will lower your DPM. Then they can start to harass you. And it's just that kind of lack of threat from risking the double, and I just find that the singles are so much better. And being able to keep peppering people with singles while still having a double loaded in your tank, it's that fear factor of the double vehicle that can actually manage to grind down its opponents, and how I feel that I am successful in this tank on a ridge line. And not just on a ridge line, in like a brawling kind of situation in the town here. It's because you can create that fear on your opponent, and you can just fire off the shells one by one, but still have that big old 80 damage impact. Or if you bounce off the WZ 111-14, have the second one for when they expose themselves, thinking that you're reloading for a long time, when you actually only have 5 seconds delay between your shots. However, of course, if you fire like that, where you're waiting those 5 seconds and you're using it as if it's a 2-round autoloader, your DPM is going to be rather lackluster, because as you'll notice, we were halfway to reloading one of the shells when we fired there. So if you fire early, i.e. you fire one shot, wait 5 seconds, fire another shot, you're actually losing half a shot's worth of reload by doing that. So you should still try and play this tank cyclically if you can. As a rule of thumb, if you feel like you have enough time to reload and still be able to shoot the tank, you should. However, as you could see there, I fired early and I pulled back. And that's because I was worried about the Stridsvagn 103B. It's got near 300mm of penetration if the player has the top gun. And with the rounds that they're hitting, we'll never really know for certain. But 300mm of penetration against an ST2 in that scenario, I'm not willing to risk it. And I do feel like firing early would be the better call. So luckily for me, the Stridsvagn 103B is going to pop back up. And having dealt a huge amount of damage with armor piercing, now I'm going to be loading the gold and using high explosive anti-tank instead. Because against the Stridsvagn 103O, I should say, the armor piercing rounds will be able to overmatch the lower plate, but against the upper plate, there's actually quite a lot of armor on the Stridsvagn 103O, where my armor piercing round could ricochet. So now dealt with the tier 9 Swedish TD, I was starting to feel chipper. With 7 minutes left on this game and still 9,500 hit points to hopefully be able to carve up. But obviously, I can't see what the K91 and the Emil on the other flank's hit points are. I was starting to get a bit excited that this could be a fairly meaty round. But between me and that meaty ground, there's an ST2 on the enemy team who doesn't seem to quite know how to side scrape that vehicle. And we've actually managed to take no damage from the ST2, even though they fired at us at least 3 times, about 3 times here. But we've managed to actually go through them 3 times. Now, I am firing high explosive anti-tank rounds at this player, and I probably should do, because they do give me a definitive advantage for going through the upper plate, and they will make my lower pens more reliable. But in this situation, I decided, game is ending, let's get in, and oh dear, I kind of mess it up. This is going to be very greedy unless I hit this double on the lower plate, and one bad goes to worse. I decide now to try and get the side of the ST2, having fluffed the shells there against the lower plate. And the Scorpion G hits me once again. And suddenly I've gone from being in a position where I had a good chunk of hit points to now having absolutely nothing. But luckily, it's not only armor-piercing rounds and heat rounds you can fire on this tank. We're going to go with the HE rounds too, dealing 549 damage to a Scorpion G with a second shot there. The alpha damage on these HE shells, 530, so it was a good roll. We're going to fire another one just under the gun of the Scorpion G, adding in a cheeky 1,100 extra damage right at the end of the game here. And just like that, the ST2 clubs its way, albeit through a nice matchup on this map, and picks up a filthy 9,000 damage. So, to double or not to double, that was the question that I posed at the start of the video. And really, I feel that the double should be used when you feel that you've got 80 or 90% chance to be able to handle the tank, or against the ST2 there, if it allows you to be able to take the tank out quicker. By preparing the shot as you come round the corner, you can sometimes be able to take out a vehicle that's on about 700 hit points, whereas otherwise you'd have to fire one shot, wait 5 seconds, and then fire another one. Firing the double in that situation would not only vanquish the enemy tank quicker, but it would also improve your DPM, because the shell lockout isn't as long as waiting 5 seconds to fire your second shell after the intra-clip reload, which will then interrupt the reload that you also had going on. But my final mention would also be in one of my biggest advices for all of you double-barrel players out there, to remember that the enemy, once they hear that big boom, unless you've taken them out, is going to try and pressure you. And if they don't, well, you're not really in a situation that requires extra thought anyway. So be very careful with firing the doubles. And it's usually better to keep those barrels loaded to either account for bad RNG or to be able to deal with an extra threat that you may not have considered. So an ace tanker here for the ST2 and a high caliber for that near 9,000 damage that we dealt. The 4 kills doesn't really give us much extra, but a steel war medal showing you 5,600 damage blocked. At least if you're side scraping well in this tank, it is still an absolute behemoth. But I must mention that I spent a filthy amount of credits on this game to play this vehicle in this way. But it's not often that you're having to deal 9,000 damage, right? And if after this video you're wanting to race up the Soviet double-barrel tech tree and be able to get to the ST2, I will warn you that it has one of the lower win ratios on average, at least in the last 30 days on the European server, having even a slightly less win ratio than the Rinoceronte and the AMX M454. So for every game that you get in where all of your side scraping works and your enemies just sit there in front of you and allow you to shoot them one by one, and the mill just sits there and lets you double them, yeah, there's going to be a few others where you end up against the more competitive heavy tanks that will grind you down and pose you a lot of threat with your, all in all, fairly mediocre gun depression, fairly mediocre armor, and mobility that's nothing to write home about. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this video today. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know if you've been playing any double-barrel tanks recently. Do you think they really feel all that special? Or do you think that it's just a nice kind of balanced feature of World of Tanks that can be fun, provide a little bit of variety, but isn't overpowered in the game? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.